Hello.
Hello.
Paul here, Bearded Badger Publishing and Books. Not the Friday feature. Tuesday shenanigans. I don't know. I can't think of anything with Tuesday. Anyway, I just want to welcome you to Mr. Ross Lowe. Do you want to say hello, Rob? Yeah.
Hello. I was this massive finger just came into my bedroom. That was really weird.
Like have you seen those videos of that chap that does that in front of a television on?
Brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe we should have done that. I could have thrown a ball or something. Anyway, for the benefit of everybody else, we're just going to waffle on for a couple of hours. Really, the point of the video, just to introduce you to Ross. Obviously, Ross is, we're going to be publishing Ross's fantastic novel, Step Forward, Harry Salt, in November. And really, we're just going to have a little chat about it on the Zoom thing here. I don't really know what I'm doing. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes, and hopefully you'll get to know a little bit more about the book, a little bit more about Ross, and some of his influences, some of the things that made him tick, what helps writing process, that sort of thing. Man, we'll see how it goes anyway. So, without further ado, give us a quick synopsis, then, Ross, on Step Forward, Harry Salt. Bearing in mind, we want to shift some copies of this book, so don't give everything away. Leave a little bit of meat on the bone.
Okay, you want to shift some copies. It's the best book you'll ever read, ever. No, it's so Step Forward, Harry Salt is it's a story about a guy called Harry Salt. No surprises there, and he's just this lad who's working in a steady job, kind of not entirely sure how he's got there or ended up doing there, but knows that it's time to change. It's time to move on and do something else, but he's not entirely sure what. And by way of a very unusual job interview, he ends up at a place called the Ministry of People, in the beautiful Derbyshire Hills, and things start to go more and more strange and spiral into a situation that again is completely unexpected and unlike anything he's ever experienced before. But having said that, he has been experiencing one or two odd things and throughout his life that he can't quite explain or put his finger on. Things to do with his father, things to do with his own past and where he comes from, how he originates, and the deeper he gets into his past, the deeper things spiral in the present, leading to antics and best-selling antics, and we hope. But yeah, it's a book that is, on the surface, it's quite fun. It's light. There's a lot of humor in there. It's very surreal. I can't deny that. But there's it's a pun in a way. There's a lot of depth to this book as well, and there's a lot of hidden twists and turns, and some quite dark moments in there too as well. So there's a bit of something for everyone. But yes, all set in Derbyshire. The majority of the book takes place in Derbyshire. Some of it in North Wales, and yeah, I'll leave it to people to discover for themselves from there, really.
So where did it come from then? The concept of where did Harry Salt himself come from? Is there a Harry Salt somewhere lurking around Derbyshire, or is it a pure fragment of your imagination? Or
it's a combination of all kinds of things, really. In a way, Harry Salt himself is old enough to go off to university now, because I got the idea. He originated as a character called Herbert Sherbet 18 years ago, and it's a funny story because I was working at the time. I was in between jobs, actually. I'd finished university in 1998, way back in the good old 20th century, and I'd got out of university. I'd spent a year in Cardiff where I'd studied, and then moved back to Derbyshire, and it was kind of the first job I sort of applied for at the job centre, if you like, and it was I was working for British Midland Airways, British Midland, which became BMI, and they were based in Castle Donington, in this old converted manor house with the most beautiful old building, and it was a wonderful place. I've been there for 3 years, and I was sort of deciding what to do next. And I'd applied to do teacher training, and I was just waiting for my course to start. I'd finished my job at British Midland, this amazing manor house where all kinds of crazy things going on. More of that later. But I was working at Boots in Nottingham at their headquarters, and it was a data entry job. And by midday every day, I'd entered all the data, and I was like, "What do you want me to do now?" And they were like, "Well, that's it. You've got to wait till tomorrow morning for the next lot." So I'd be sat there for an hour in this really boring place, and so I would think, and I'd come up with ideas, and I'd scribble things down, and I'd literally scribbled on a piece of paper this name, Herbert Sherbet. I didn't know who he was, what he was going to do, and my dad, unfortunately, was very ill at this time. He'd got cancer, and it had progressed really, really quickly. This now was 2002, and I went to see him, and I told him about this character, Herbert Sherbet, and he just stopped, gave me this really funny look, and he said, "Herbert Sherbet?" I said, "Yeah." He said, he says, "I came up with a name like that for something when I was younger." I was like, "Right." And then the thing was, my dad had sort of instilled this love of storytelling and stories in me from childhood. Me and my sister, who's only a year and a half younger than me, he would come and sit on the end of one of our beds. We'd get in together, and he'd tell us a story before bed, and that was the thing. That was the, ritual before bedtime, if you like. And he would either read from a book, we'd get Roald Dahl, we'd get all kind of things like that. We'd make stuff up, and he would come up with these characters. There was a character called Mark Time, and there was always all these stories about my great uncle Charlie, who had a moped, and he would do all these things. I didn't know what a moped was at that age. So in my head, I always pictured this motorized mattress that was like a hovercraft that he used to ride around on. I had no idea what a moped was, but anyway, he'd tell us all these stories, and that was a thing. And that, throughout school, I'd gone on to love English and writing and that kind of thing. And so my dad had definitely instilled that somewhere. And anyway, I told him about this, and he said, "Yeah, that's a character I had." He said, "That's really interesting." And I was like, "Well, I've only got the name. I don't know what the bloody hell I'm going to do with it, But I knocked about with it. I came up with ideas, scribbled things down. And this place that I worked at before with British Midland, Donington Hall, it became in my head this weird place called the Ministry of People, and it was an idea that I fleshed out with a friend of mine, Jay Taylor, who was my best mate at university. He was now living down in London working for the BBC, and I ended up actually a few years later going and working with him down there. We lived and worked in London together for quite a while, and he came to visit me one weekend in Breaston, where I live with my mum. And we went to a pub called the Carpenter's Arms in Dale Abbey, and we both got notebooks, and we were just banging ideas around and fleshing them out. And this place, the Ministry of People, began to really grow as an idea. And Herbert Sherbet, this guy who was kind of unwillingly or unknowingly stumbling into something that was revealing more about him as he went along in this place. As I say, not wanting to give too much away, but that's where it all began. And sadly, my dad passed away in 2003, and I wasn't, able to tell him more about it. But by then, I was starting to really explore the idea and kept going. And it kind of felt, because my dad had just a bit of knowledge of it, I really wanted to do something with it. I really wanted to take it as far as it could go. But in my head, it was only ever going to be something I'd write for myself, and just as just something I did as a hobby, and it became a 6-part TV series that I only ever wrote 3 episodes of, and then it just sat on a computer and never went anywhere. And then I moved to London in 2007, and I started to try and write it as a screenplay. And again, it got halfway done, and then I didn't get anywhere with it. And then a guy who was a friend of a friend who often used to come round to my flat. I was living with a few people in London at the time, and a guy called Chris Hutchins, who was involved in the film industry. I kind of showed him, this idea for the film that I'd got. And he's like, "Yeah," he says, "it's not quite fleshed out. It doesn't quite work as a film." He said, "Have you ever thought about writing it as a book?" And I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And he said, "Well," he says, "you might be able to just tack it somewhere else, and you're not kind of constricted by trying to make it into something that's 90 minutes long or whatever." I was like, "Okay." He said, "Have you ever tried writing a book for us?" No. And and sure enough, in the evenings I started writing a bit and a bit, and I left London in 2011. By then it was 16,000 words long, and it wasn't until I met my wife in 2018, and I showed her this 16,000 words, which had sat dormant for 8 odd years. I showed her this that I'd already written, and she said, looked at it, read it, and said, "You need to finish this, and other people need to read it." I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, you've got to do it." And my wife's Canadian. We'd met in Toronto. We'd got married in Toronto at City Hall, and she was planning to move to England. So we were staying together over Christmas and New Year, and this was going into 2019. And on this January the 2nd, 2019, I sat in this cafe and I started to write it. And I kept going at it and going at it and going at it. Later in the year, we moved to Berlin. I went to a writing class, an evening writing class here in Berlin, and just workshopped a little bit of what I'd written. And it went down really well. And I was like, wow, fantastic. And I kept going and I kept going, and it finished it. And now it existed as a book. And she said, "You've got to do something with it. You've got to do something with it." So I started, writing to publishers and agents and stuff, and got a lot of rejections and stuff. Nicely written letters and stuff. Got it edited by the lady who ran the writing course, Kate, who's an English lady who lives out here in Berlin. And then I eventually found out about this amazing publishing house called Bearded Badger. And there we go. So that's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but
no, it's interesting.
It's been brewing for years. It's been brewing for years.
It's weird because I was talking with Drew Gummerson recently, and Flamingo Hotel started out with Drew writing little bits on a phone and on notes and little vignettes, if you like. And I think it's amazing, really, how I'm not a writer. I do bits of writing, bits of weird sort of short stories, but I'm not, a classically trained writer, whatever that might mean. But I just think it's interesting that the whole process can be sort of how, you can get a bit of inspiration somewhere and you jot something down and then park it. And then one day you pick it up and think, you know what, I need to flesh that out a bit more. I need to do something with that, or somebody else reads it. And as it was in your case, your wife who said, you know what, you need to finish that off. And then, which kind of brings me to think about, like, the environment one picks to work in. And you were talking then, you've kind of finished writing the book in a cafe. Was that in Toronto? Was it?
It was. I started rewriting it again in Toronto, and then bits of it got finished in Stapleford, in my house in Nottinghamshire, where I was living at the time. I've sat in, the huge chunks of it got written here in Berlin. I'd sit out on the balcony. We've got a tiny little balcony here, just big enough for like a tiny little IKEA table and a couple of chairs, and I'd hammer out bits there and rewrite it and rework it. But I just got this impetus, and it was strange because some days I'd sit and look at my keyboard and I think I know what I want to write about, and I'd write something that would be rubbish. I'd get rid of it, park it, put it somewhere else. But there were other times, and I said this to Kate, who edited it in the end, and she's great. She's a published author, and she's a wonderful lady, and really helped me really form the book as it is now and make it into something good. Really strong in comparison to what it was, which was a bit frayed around the edges, and some bits didn't quite add up and things. And she was very blunt, very honest. She probably spent too much time in Berlin. That's where you learn your bluntness. But she was worth every penny, worth her weight in gold. And there were times when I started to write it after the sort of direction given me, and I remember saying to her, there was a few weeks where it felt like it was writing itself. I'd just sit down and without really thinking about it, and it would just flow out of me. And it was, I don't want to say like it was some kind of transcendental experience or something weird like that, but it was very weird. And I had to say to her, I don't know what's going on, but at the moment it's just, and I was spending every waking hour in my head in thinking this, that, and the other, and where are they going to go, what they're doing. These characters are now relying on me to sort it all out for them. And it, like, when I started writing it, 10 whatever years ago as a book, I knew what the ending was going to be. I had a set of endings, and I knew which was my favorite, where I really wanted it to go. And I'd got like mileposts along the way, which I knew I was going to get to. It was just how I got there and how I knitted them all together. And so I found out I didn't always write in sequence. It wasn't chronologically written a lot of the time. I would find my favorite scenes that I really got fleshed in my head and I could really visualize. And then it would be a case of going back and like going, right, so what's there and that, notebooks all over the place and post-it notes and God knows what else. But and so much stuff that didn't get used as well. So many stuff that I thought earlier on in the process was going to be, one of the best bits of it, in the end, didn't end up in. So the editing process was as vital as the actual writing, writing it all down in the first place.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you did, like you're talking about how the words kind of just poured out of you, this sort of weird experience, and I do wonder, like I think a lot about the writing process, and I think we kind of romanticize it a little bit as well, don't we? Sort of sat there in some a cafe and banging in the corner, right? And you get these visions of like your Kerouacs or your Hemingway in Paris and all this sort of stuff. And the reality is often very different. Like you say, it's notebooks strewn all over the place, post-it notes everywhere, grabbing a few minutes when you can. As I say, I talked about Drew writing on his phone before he went to do a shift at work and all this sort of stuff. And I think, I guess you have to write when the inspiration takes you. And as you say, you felt like then that there was a sense of responsibility to these fictional characters that you've created, to give them that narrative, to give them that story. Yeah. So interesting.
It was like they're sat in a room somewhere waiting for me to work out how to open the door for them, and until you do, they're stuck there, and you've got to get them out. And it was, it felt like that, and I grew very strong feelings for these characters, because I guess I wanted to make them believable. I wanted to make them relatable. That was a big part of it for me, to make it very much set in our world, but strange things happen. Like as a kid, it's, apologies for going off on tangents, but like one of my favorite films as a kid growing up was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because I just loved Steven Spielberg as a kid. I loved E.T. Cried my eyes out in the cinema. I think I was 5, but Close Encounters, Mum and Dad had videoed it, and then we got a video cassette that I would watch, and it was what I really loved about it from a very early age. It was just the fact that all these extraordinary things were happening to a guy who couldn't be more ordinary if he tried. He was just a bloke who was struggling to hold his marriage together, and he would reverse his car out onto the road and knock the kid's scooter flying and all that, because there was all this crap in the garden. Just like anybody else, and it was just that really appealed to me. The fact that it spends time set in the real world and setting that real world out, but something weird's going on. And then I guess it's, as I grew up, it was when Twin Peaks came out. I was 13, and I just loved this really boring, steady old town, but just millimeters under the surface, there's all this weird stuff going on, and it's that kind of sense of wonder in stories that I was trying to instill something like that in mine. It's set in Derbyshire. It's where it's the place that I know best, and it's where I grew up. There's no, that's not a coincidence, but it allows me to then set a normal tone and set something that hopefully people in Derbyshire and beyond will recognise as being quite, a normal place, normal set of affairs, normal world where things that are happening in it aren't too far away from what's happening now. But under the surface, just like you just brush a little bit of soil away, just move the curtain slightly, there's some seriously weird stuff going on, and that then influences the normality and breaks it, you know.
Oh, it's definitely. I mean, that like you're talking about Twin Peaks, it's the most normal log falling town and Derbyshire's very, you know, but then Derbyshire's similar, isn't it, in many ways? You know, it's just a normal kind of place. We have rolling hills, we have little mill towns.
That's right. It's very similar, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, but then similarly in Harry Salt, there's something not quite meets the eye sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely get that as an influence from reading it. Um, what can I talk about next? So who, you know, obviously you're a copywriter by trade or by profession. So that's writing for a living, albeit a very, very different kind of writing. So do you kind of have to put your copywriting hat on and then go, oh, I'm going to write a bit of fiction now, I'm going to put the fiction hat on, or is writing just some, or is it very easy to switch from one mode to the other and you know, almost just something you do, you know?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because obviously during the day, as a copywriter, I mean, to give you an idea of some of the people I write for, I write for I work with an agency and provide copy for Boots. And so if you go into a boot store anywhere up and down the country, the stuff that I write or proofread is the in-store stuff. So if you see a poster, or even if you see like little tickets on the edge of shelves, things like that, chances I've either written a little bit of what's on there or I've proofread it, you know. So I'll be talking about toothpaste and dandruff, anti-dandruff shampoo, erectile dysfunction tablets one minute, and then the next minute I'm off in the ministry of people doing this kind of stuff. And it's not good for my waistline, that's for sure, because it means I'm sat at a laptop most of the day. But yeah, it is. It's very different. But then, if you're working in marketing and you want to convince people to buy something or to just respond in some way, whether it's filling in a form and sending it off or whatever, you've got to appeal to them. You've got to hook them. There is some element of storytelling involved in there, and I think that's why I enjoy working as a copywriter. I've been freelance now for since 2011, when I moved back from London. I worked in television down in London for a number of years, and then came back up here and started this job. And I found my niche, I think, as a daytime job. And but this for me is something I've always wanted to do, is to write creatively. And I think I've always just been too scared to do it. I just, you know, am I good enough? And
That's the massive thing I've found with writers, is that sort of getting over the sort of threshold of, you know, the confidence of, well, you're bearing your soul, aren't you? You're bearing your soul on a page, and it's more or less, you know, hoping someone else is going to feel what you felt for that work. That's a huge thing, and I think for me as a publisher, that's a huge responsibility as well, because we were talking about this before we started recording, weren't we, about how important it is for me to represent your work in a way that make, you know, that deserving of the, you know, your effort, your time, your bearing of soul, and you know, the creative process. It's a massive responsibility that weighs on me, that, you know, and hoping that I do it justice. So
yeah, no pressure, mate. Obviously, no pressure. No, I'm very lucky, and I wouldn't just say that because you're here, but I feel very lucky to have got involved with a publisher based in Derbyshire. I got you know, a chap from across the tracks in the West Midlands, but we're all Midlanders at the end of the day, so it's fine. But no, I just love that we're working on this together, and it's felt like a collaborative process, putting it together and getting it out there. And no, I've got no worries or qualms with how that's coming in together. But yeah, it is that like, until it's out there and until people read it, I know I'm proud of it, because I've achieved something I've always said I wanted to do. But I actually think it's a nice story then, and I look back at it now, because I've had some time to sit away from it. I finished writing it in April God, where are we now? What year is it? 2021. I finished writing it in April 2020, I think. 2020, 2019. I can't remember. Bloody hell, this is what COVID is, the whole lockdown experience has done to me. But I don't know where I am anymore. But I've sat away from it for a long time now. But as we've started to, go through the cover reveal and all that exciting stuff, and I've dipped back into it to just reaffirm to myself that the thing exists, because I still find it hard to believe that this is happening. Actually, I can imagine somebody's just going to click their fingers and you're going to disappear and everything's going to disappear, and like this isn't really happening. It's a very strange feeling, but yeah, until people read it, I just want people to like it. If a couple of people really enjoy it, I'd be over the moon. I really would.
Well, I enjoyed it, so there's one. So, thinking about that writing process again, then, Ross. So, one thing I'll say about Harry Salt is it's definitely a melting pot of different genres. I got asked, well, what genre does it fit in? And I kind of struggled a little bit to sort of say, well, there's little bits of sci-fi type weird stuff going on in there. It's quite realist. It's quite, there's a lot of humor in there, as you say, and then there's the flashback bit. Again, not trying to give too much away, that becomes quite sort of serious and literary fictiony. And I thought, well, okay, who are your influences? What, obviously there's a whole different, you must read different genres. Do you have any particular genre of writer or any particular writers that you thought that's the guy for me, or that's the girl for me? And
it's a good question, and I mean it is hard to pigeonhole it, and I've done the same when people have asked me, and I'm sat there thinking this is my own bloody book, and I can't quite ascribe a genre to it, but it's it's like you can't pigeonhole it, because you get there, the pigeon's already there, and he's like, bugger off, find another role, and you keep going from one to the next. But I guess one of my favorite authors has always been Douglas Adams, and I think why I like him is because he does the surreal thing. He does chucks in a bit of science fiction, and I've always been a huge science fiction fan from since a kid. I was a kid, and I saw, like I say, Close Encounters or Star Trek or whatever, and all those things have appealed to me. But I think one of the reasons I always loved Star Trek so much was because it was just this bunch of people who were just living a normal, getting on with life, but doing it in a spaceship on crazy planets and stuff. So they were just average people, who just happened to get involved in all this kind of thing. And Douglas Adams does that. Arthur Dent. And you've got the analogy running along of his house getting knocked down for a bypass, but actually the planet's going to get destroyed for a bypass, and all these. And I just loved all these little clever layers that he did with his writing, but also he's very satirical. A lot of the stuff that he writes is clearly, taking the mickey out of governments, authorities, all the tiny minutiae of things that we have to put up with or get pissed off with on a daily basis. From down to machines that don't quite work the way you want them to, or not being able to get a decent cup of tea somewhere else, and things like that. And he just. I've just always loved his style, and very sad that he was taken when he was, because I'm sure he had a good many more books in him to write and everything. And Dirk Gently, I love those books as well. So yeah, I guess he's very much an influence. Not that I'd ever aspire to be like anyone like that, but you can't escape being influenced by what you read. And I read a lot of Douglas Adams in the past. I read a lot of science fiction. Very late to reading fantasy. I didn't really get into fantasy, and I haven't really read many fantasy books, if I'm honest, but I read some very good ones sort of towards the middle of my 30s, and I guess, I just saying that, there was an author I read when I was a kid at school, a lady called Susan Cooper, who wrote a series of books, 5 books, called The Dark is Rising sequence, and the second book is called The Dark is Rising. And I actually read the second one first, not knowing about this whole sequence. Took it out of the school library as a kid, because the cover as it was a puffin book, frightening as hell. It's got this this dark rider on a horse, and the face is like an owl but with antlers, and but it's also it's done like a photograph. It's really frightening. And I just remember it frightening the crap out of me, and me taking it home and not daring to open it for a little while. But she's a fantasy writer. But again, it's set in the modern day, so it's a little kid who could have been in the 1980s or 70s, and all this weird stuff happens. So again, without really realizing it, when I look back on Harry's Salt, when I sort of look under the covers, now I can see my own sort of personal literary influences, but it's from all different, you know, shapes and sides and whatever. And but yeah, sorry, yeah, I'm waffling on again. But yeah, Susan Cooper. If you ever get a chance, Susan Cooper, the darkest place to see.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with her, so that's something I need to have a look at. Yeah,
do it. Those books are the ones I've gone back to so many times since I was, like I say, 7 or 8, whatever, when I first read it, and I last read them 2 or 3 years ago. Very.
Yeah. So whilst we're on the topic of favourite writers and stuff like that, this sounds like it's been pre-prepared. So I thought we'd go. I started doing a newsletter thing when we first started Bearded Badger back in, you know, in the wonderful pandemic times, and, you know, just trying to give something different. And one of the things I thought was, well, how can we get people to talk about their favourite books and stuff? So I went the old wedding vows, you know, the something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. So there's something old's obvious, you know, a book from, you know, the past. Say, I don't know, it's got to be at least 30 years old. Something new, like something in the last few years. Something borrowed, a book that sort of, you may have borrowed it from a library, it may have been lent to you by a friend or something, but it's something that wow, I've you know, made a mark on it. And then there's something blue we've got to be a little bit creative with, because we've got to be careful when we're describing blue things.
A bit of blue.
Yeah, it had a different meaning than our youth. But if you think steak, right, a blue steak, rare. So not necessarily something rare, but a book that perhaps you don't hear talked about much, you know, that, or you think deserves better coverage across the media than it gets. So with that concept in mind, something old, what would you pick for that?
Something old, okay. It's almost a dead heat, but I feel like I've talked about science fiction enough to drive everyone mad. So my original idea was probably The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which obviously is very old, which I loved just because of, well, a lot of his books, they sort of hit the nail on the head with his future predictions, and it's things that come true, like these spinning silver discs that you can hear things on, and you know, air raid sirens, people going underground. I think that was in The Time Machine. But The War of the Worlds, I love. But the reason I fell in love with The War of the Worlds was probably the same with a lot of people. It was the Jeff Wayne soundtrack. But that's not my book. It's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Casey, which I just think is an incredible book. I was lucky enough to be, I did a lot of amateur theatre in and around Derbyshire, sort of down the years, and I was lucky enough to be in a production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest at the Derby Guildhall with a theatre company called Four Blokes, and founded by 4 blokes, funny enough. And as part of, you know, getting ready for the show and everything, I read the book, and the director Barry was like, "You'll love it. It's your kind of thing. You'll really love it." And I'd always heard how good it was. My mum's a massive reader, always has been, and she, you know, I say my dad inspired me, sort of from a storytelling point of view. My mum really inspired me to read. She bought me The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy actually when I was 11, I think, and it just sort of changed my world. But she'd always said about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, she said there's one bit in it that just makes you drop the book to the floor. And when she'd originally read it in the 60s, she said it just blew her away. And yeah, it's all told from the chief's perspective, so that's very different to the film where McMurphy's the kind of sense around him. But the play, interestingly, was written after the book and before the film, and it's somewhere in the middle of the two. So the play, it's not entirely told from the chief's perspective, but it every now and again goes into his mindset, and he'll do a small monologue here and there. But it's much more towards McMurphy, and then you got the film, which is completely McMurphy, if you like. But I just loved it. I thought it was a fantastic book. I loved you get the sense of when it was written, Ken Casey was sort of, the kind of a writer he was, the kind of things he was involved in back in the day. There's a very sort of 60s vibe to it, especially with all the things going on in the Chief's mind as well. But yeah, brilliant book. All the characters, so strong.
I've read that. I've read. I mean, it's like, for me, it's a book that really epitomises that whole counterculture movement. This sort of this sense of the only way is control. It's about control, isn't it? And institutionalizing people. Give you a sense of control over anything. And it's quite a scary book, isn't it? In many ways, if you think that's how we're treating people. I mean, the cheat, like you say, the book's written from a completely different perspective to the film. Most people will have seen the film, which is equally excellent.
Which is super.
I would recommend to anybody, go read that book. It's a quality book. Quality.
Yeah.
The Penguin reissue on the Modern Classics is a nice copy of that, actually.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I'd say it's one of those books that I think everybody should read at some point, because stylistically and the story is just a brilliant story.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's a great piece of literature. That.
Cool. So that's the old. What about something new then? What book has tickled your fancy more recent times?
It's a tricky one, that. I've been playing around with a lot. I mean, if you're going to go for the last 12 months, and this is not blowing smoke up anybody's backside for any particular reason at all, but Flamingo, 7 Nights at the Flamingo Hotel was and is a superb book. It's I said to Drew on Twitter at the time, and yourself, I think it's unlike anything I've read for a long time, and it was just a real slap to the face, breath of fresh air. For that, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I knew I was going to enjoy it, but it did so many unexpected things, and it kept it going consistently right to the last word. It was really good. So that I would say is one, but for fear of people watching this, just a sycophant. I would say the other new recent release. It's not within the last 12 months, but is Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hessian. And I only read that off the back of the amount of people saying such warm things about it. The first sentence is just jaw-droppingly good. And I just looked at it and I thought, wow, okay, well done, that's brilliant. And just kept on going with it. And I think you said it as well. It's like it's the antidote to 21st century life. It's the antidote to
particularly
to conservative rule, whatever, anything that's wound you up over the last 5 or 10 years. It's the real antidote to that. It's so gentle. It's so warm. The characters in it are lovely, and it's just normal people. But there's enough going on there to just hook you and take you along on their ride, and you fall in love with the characters instantly. And I've recommended it to so many people since, because it's just a how would I describe it? Is in terms of a reading experience, it's just unlike any other. It just makes you feel better about everything. You can read a chapter and then go back and you'll be refreshed. You're feeling a bit down before you read that chapter. You'll feel a lot better afterwards. And I think it's a marvelous piece of work. And I've got Panenka, his next book, to look forward to when I get back to England and pick that up. So, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's a super book. Super book.
I'd agree with that. It's got a warmth to it, hasn't it? I think I've said it. I mean, we've sold probably since we've opened the shop back in April. I would say that's probably been one of our best-selling books, to be honest. And I think a lot of it is early on. I was on the radio a few times, and people were asking me to recommend books. I was on Radio Derby, and that was the one that sprung to mind more than any over the last few years. Apart from obviously plugging Flamingo, which You feel a bit disingenuous doing that, but go on, it is the best book in the world. But I just think it's got that perfect sort of, you've got these two characters that are sitting on the fringes of society, and it's just about how they navigate their way through life, isn't it? And the quiet club, and I just thought it was a beautiful book. Should be available on prescription, really, shouldn't it? You know,
Definitely.
Particularly for these times that we're living now, you know.
I love, from what I can gather, is that the book has become successful mostly by word of mouth.
Really, actually, really. I mean, Blue Moose.
For the people, I mean, Blue Moose seem to be doing a fantastic job as an independent publisher, but they are an independent publisher, and you know that like, you know yourself, it's like you do everything and to get it out there. So for it to do as well as it's doing, and for people to have really grown to love it as they have by word of mouth, that in itself, it's almost like something from in the book.
Yeah, it is.
Really nice.
The Blue Moose they're a lovely publisher. They put out some really, really high quality stuff, and Ronan seems like such a genuinely nice guy, doesn't he?
He does.
They both deserve every ounce of success this book's giving to them, I think. So hats off to Blue Moose and Ronan Hesselin.
Definitely.
Let's move on to something borrowed. Any thoughts on that one?
Yes, I do actually. I was it goes back to 2011. No, just before that actually, and I was sort of a bit down on my luck and in a bit of a rough spot. And a mate of mine, Paul Wilson. You might hear a crying baby in the next room. I apologise if so, but there's a 5-month-old baby in the next room. We live. It's a 1-bedroom apartment that we're living here in Berlin, and yeah, I'm not getting much writing done at the moment because this as soon as I get off this interview, I'm going to look after the baby and sort her out. But the mum and baby are in the next room. Yes, back in 2007, bit of a rough spot. My mate Paul, good name, Paul Wilson, lent me a book. He said, "I think you'll really like this," and it was called The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and I absolutely fell head over heels with it. It's a fantasy book. I said to him, I don't really read fantasy, but this was kind of my first road into it, and it was because it was written so beautifully. I mean, every page sort of drips with detail in terms of whether it's character or whether it's location or whatever, but it doesn't overdo anything. But at the same time, it doesn't underdo anything either. It's that perfect medium, and it follows the story of this character, Fitzchivalry, who's he's born out of wedlock, and is actually the son of the ruling family, but he's shunned by that family as well because of how he was brought about and everything, and he has to go and sleep in the stables and sort of thing. And this the guy who looks after the horses and everything takes him under his wing and starts to teach him, and he discovers that he's got this curious bond with animals, which becomes a central part of the story. But that he's also got these other skills as well that are sort of far beyond other people. But it's so beautifully told because they're all the problems of life are in there, from love to families and all that kind of thing. And as it turns out, it's the first book in, I think it's a series of 15, the last one of which was written, I think about 3 years ago now. And it's beautiful. There's this whole world is built through them all. But just brilliant books. And I followed them all the way through. I actually got to meet the author, Robin Hobb. She did a book signing in Waterstones in Nottingham a few years ago, and I got to meet, and that was amazing. She's American. She's from Washington, but she writes these books like a man from the Middle Ages, because the main character, and it's all written from his point of view, is this man. And I before I knew Robin Hobb was an American woman, I just assumed it was a British bloke that had written it, and was blown away. And her writing style is just gorgeous. And so that for me is something borrowed, because I'm so grateful to Paul Wilson for giving me that book. He gave me the first 3, and I just wolfed through them. And it was, like I say, it was at a time when I was struggling with things a bit, and really helped me through. But because
Escapism.
helped me through because I could lose myself in these books so much.
Oh, cool. I've not read those. I'm gonna have to get them on my radar. Like you though, I've never been much of a fantasy reader, but then last year I think it was, I read Morgie by Alex Phoebe, published by Galley Beggar,
Oh yeah.
and I thought it was a stunning book, absolutely stunning. And you know, in terms of genre, it wouldn't have been something I think I'd have picked up. But I subscribed with Galley Beggar, so I got it sent as part of that subscription. And I was really, really impressed with it. So maybe I need to read a bit more fantasy, and sounds like that might be a good place to start. So
Yeah, it's funny. It's amazing how, you know, you think something's not necessarily for you, and then somebody just plops it in front of you, and you're not doing anything better, and you give it a go, and
yeah,
all of a sudden it changes your worldview a little bit.
yeah, I get that. So the last one is Creative Steak. Whatever that means. Something blue, something that you think needs a bit more people shouting about it.
Yeah, again, I had a few sort of books in mind for this one, but I think it's more of an author than necessarily one particular book. It's a guy called Christopher Moore, and he's American, and I wouldn't have found out about him were it not for my wife, who's Canadian, and obviously gets a lot of books from south of the border in America, in Canada. And a lot of things are very similar in terms of the media up there, and culture, and what gets swapped back and forth. And she gave me a book to read by this guy called Christopher Moore, and then this was kind of off the back of my love of Douglas Adams, I think. And they're two very different writers, but he does write in a very satirical and very, very comedic way. His books are very, very light, but a lot of fun. And they cover all kinds of things. The one that my wife gave me, do you know what? I've forgotten the title of it. That's brilliant, isn't it? There's this. No, it's called A Dirty Job. It's called A Dirty Job, and it's about this guy who his wife dies at the start, and it's really touchingly written, really movingly written. Really, she dies giving birth to their daughter, but it turns out that their daughter has powers which are quite frightening, and she's actually associated with death. But as a little baby, she can sort of look at, you know, somebody's dog and go, oh, and the dog just suddenly drops dead. Things like that start happening. And but her father has to take on this role where he's, you know, collecting souls when people die, and all these souls have to be collected and everything. And that's the dirty job. He has to basically turn up on the scene just as people are about to die and collect their souls and all this kind of thing. Wow. Utterly daft. All set in San Francisco, modern day San Francisco. And it's terrific. It really, really good fun.
Remind me the name of the author again, sorry.
Christopher Moore. And one of the more recent books of his that I've read is called Lamb, and it's the story of what happened to Jesus between birth and hitting 30. So it's the blank bit of the Bible that they you know, where they completely skip over his childhood and teenage years. This book tells his story through the eyes of his best mate Biff. Who's like the 13th disciple you never hear about. And again, it's really irreverent stuff, but written well enough to keep it, you know, turning over. And he's clearly done his research on all the religions of the world, because basically, as it turns out, Jesus tries a bit of every religion before settling on his own sort of thing. And they, you know, they go to all these different places. You know, they go to the Far East and they discover Buddhism and Hinduism and all these other religions and try them all out. Really. And it's brilliantly written. It's I'm sure it'll offend no end of like you know, hardline Christians and stuff, but it's again, it's just a fun book. But yeah, he knows what he's talking about. He's clearly a bright guy, this Christopher Moore, and he's got a lot of fans in America, really big in America, but not well.
Not on my radar at all. So, which is why he's something blue.
There you go.
Well, I think we've had a good old waffle, haven't we, mate? So
All right.
we've talked a bit about Harry Salt, which is out in November.
Yes.
Um, Thanks to everybody that's pre-ordered a copy. Can't thank you enough for that. We've talked a bit about what influencer writing and that sort of stuff, and then we've talked about a few books that perhaps other people might get something from. So we've had a good old natter there, mate.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And
Thank you, and I shall leave you now to attend to your. Is she 5 months old? Did you say?
5 months old. Yeah.
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 So I remember though we were talking about this previous. My youngest he'll be 18 in January.
Wow.
Time goes by in a blink of an eye. So enjoy every minute, and we'll catch up again sometime soon. Thanks to everybody for listening to us waffle on for an hour, and I'm sure we'll do this again sometime soon.
Fantastic.
See ya.